Michigan capped off the Jim Harbaugh era by winning their third consecutive Big Ten championship and a 15-0 national championship season last year. This year, things are a little bit different. They look a little bit different in Ann Arbor, Michigan. No more Jim Harbaugh, no more Jesse Minter, no more J.J. McCarthy, no more Blake Corum, no more great offensive line. But this is still a team that can compete at the highest level in the Big Ten. Can they repeat for a fourth consecutive year in the conference? We talked to Clayton Sayfie of the Wolverine as part of the On3 Network to preview all things Michigan football in 2024.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
To start this preview on the Michigan Wolverines, and I'm going to quote this now, and I'm going to quote it probably until the season starts. Joel Klatt said it in preparation to the Michigan spring game. Everything is different, yet nothing has changed. And that perfectly summarizes the defending national champs as Michigan looks to defend their title. To preview all things University of Michigan football, we welcome in Clayton Sayfie from thewolverine.com, from the Wolverine podcast, from everything The Wolverine, the Michigan site, as a part of the On3 Network. Clayton, it's great to have you here to talk all things maize and blue football, to preview the 2024 season for the Michigan Wolverines. Here's where I want to start out with. We mentioned at the beginning just how different this team is, yet the DNA and the culture of the team is still there. What would you think is the biggest difference with a Sherrone Moore-led Michigan football team as opposed to maybe the previous regime with the Jim Harbaugh-led Michigan football program?
Yeah, that's kind of the question that everyone's trying to find the answer to, and it's a great question, because I think a lot of what Michigan is going to do and how they're operating is the same, what you would expect when you hire from within a guy who was with the program for 6 years in Sherrone Moore before he gets promoted to head coach. But at the same time, he's obviously going to have his own twist on things. But you ask all these different players and, they talk about how a few things. One, the expectations haven't changed. The standard hasn't changed. And that's really important to them. I think especially the guys who are now upperclassmen who are coming back. And, they lose their strength coach, too, Ben Herbert. And, he spent as much time with the players as anybody. But it sounds like that has remained very similar as well. Justin Tress is the guy who they promoted from within, a theme to how they went about this transition. And they've kept things pretty similar there. So I'm sure there will be things, and how they operate and how they go about it. And I think we'll just learn more about that when the season comes because for all intents and purposes, they're kind of looking at this as a continuation of what they've done in the past. And there's really no reason not to do that when you're coming off of having so much success. This program's won 40 of its last 43 games, 3 straight Big Ten titles, the national championship. So, Sherrone Moore's got to have his own twist, but you got to also realize that what you did worked and you got to continue that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, the numbers that you mentioned, I think they're doing just fine from promoting from within. Now, when I do a lot of these Big Ten previews, of course, I'm going to start with the most important player on the field, and that's the quarterback. For a lot of these Big Ten programs, you have player X, and they're trying to reach a certain level. Can this quarterback take them to 9, 10, 11, whatever wins? Now, when I look at Michigan, it's one of the biggest question marks on the team when you look at the quarterback position. Look, it's still early fall camp. We might not even know this until like the week of that first game when Michigan hosts Fresno State on Big Ten Saturday night. So I won't ask you to maybe pick, hey, who's it going to be? But from what we kind of know of what Sherrone Moore is going to run, which skill set do you think, from the Alex Orjis to the Davis Warrens to maybe Jack Tuttle coming back from an injury, which skill set do you think blends in best to what Michigan wants to do offensively in 2024?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll first say this too, and I know we'll talk about the defense, but I feel like that defense is going to keep them in every single game. And this season, whether it's an 8-win year or another undefeated season, it could come down to 10 to 20 plays that the quarterback has to make. Some of the ones you might forget about if you win the game, but it was that third down in the second quarter that kept the drive alive, and then you went on to score a touchdown, and then you win by 10 or something like that. So the quarterback play is going to be so big in determining what this team's ceiling is. In terms of skill set, I mean, you mentioned it, and it's a great question because each guy contending for the job has a different skill set. I mean, Alex Orji is, one of the top freaks in the country, according to Bruce Feldman, at the quarterback spot, the number one freak among quarterbacks last year, with just ridiculous numbers. And, he's 6'3", 235 pounds. You saw him come into games last year. Michigan trusted him enough and believed in his ability enough as a runner, which is a key, to take J.J. McCarthy off the field in some of their biggest games. He ran 8 times in the final 4 games. They kind of had a little bit of a package for him there, running the football. He tried to throw once and ended up just kind of running out of bounds for a loss of a couple yards against Alabama. But that's where this comes in, right, is that we haven't seen him throw. He actually has less completions in his career than running back Donovan Edwards, who's completed 3 passes amazingly. But Alex Orji has only thrown once, and it was a completion early on in the 2022 season, 2 years ago. So there's a lot he needs to prove from a passer skill set. I mean, Davis Warren may be the best pure passer on the team, but isn't as mobile. Jack Tuttle entering his 7th year at his 3rd school. He started at Utah in 2018, way back then. Jeez. Spent time in Indiana. Now in his 2nd season at Michigan. He's mobile. He also, it seems like he can make kind of the simple plays. I think the question with him is, one, is he durable enough to last an entire season if he is your starter? Because he's battled injuries. He missed spring ball this year as he was coming back from a procedure. But the other thing is, can he push the ball downfield? A lot of his passes have been kind of dink and dunk type of stuff. He started 5 games in the Big Ten at Indiana before, so he has some experience, but we just haven't seen enough out of him to know that he's some sure thing either, that he's going to raise the ceiling of this team. So you're going to build the offense differently around each guy depending on who it is. And I will say the one thing that I know, or not know, but I think is for sure going to happen this year is Alex Orji is going to play a big role in this offense. Even if he's not the starter, I expect him to get sprinkled in here and there in the offense with his package being expanded. But he could be the starter as well if he proves himself. And I think it's all going to come down to fall camp.
Well, what's interesting about this year's team, and specifically this year's schedule, is you got the Horns coming in week 2. This isn't like maybe the past couple of years. Remember a couple of years ago where they were splitting JJ and Cade McNamara to figure out who was going to be the quarterback. You don't really have that luxury with a great Texas team from the SEC coming into town. So Donovan Edwards, right, he's been in this program a couple of years. You guys recently talked on your podcast, when a big run needs to be made, he's the guy that has made the big play as of late. Maybe he took a little bit of a step back last year with Blake Corum running it back one more year. Maybe that got into his head a little bit. There's many different theories as to maybe why Donovan Edwards had the year that he had last season. But as we look forward to 2024, he seems to be the guy. Is this more of a number 1 is Edwards and there's a clear backup in Kaleo Mullings, or is this going to be a 1A and 1B that we've seen the last couple of years? Of course, we know Haskins and Corum, and then, of course, Edwards, who is the 1B to Corum's 1A.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one that I'm just really interested to see how it evolves throughout the year. And even in 2021, when it was Haskins and Corum, it was pretty split at the beginning of the year. And then Haskins started to come on. They started to use him more. Corum got hurt a little bit and kind of Haskins show. So it can evolve throughout a season, even if you have one plan coming in. Things can change. So I think coming into the year, it's Donovan Edwards is the one. Kaleo Mullings is probably your second guy, your short yardage back, if you need him in those situations. But again, that could change. And is there a wild card like, top 150 back Jordan Marshall, who comes into play here as well and has a breakout freshman season? He's just arriving in the summer, so it's going to be a little bit harder for him to have a big freshman year. But these are, a key few months for him to get up to speed. But I think Donovan Edwards has the opportunity to do pretty much anything at the running back spot this year. He has a lot of talent. He's shown it in different spurts in his career. He just hasn't been consistent enough. But to be fair to him, he hasn't also had the opportunity that he's going to have this season as the number 1 back with the amount of carries and touches and being a focal point of the offense that he's going to be. So I'm excited to watch him. He's on the cover of the college football video game. I think he's one of the sport's top names coming into the year because of what he's done in those big games. He just needs to do it now in between those big spark plays that we all know about.
So whether the run game is successful or not is going to rely upon what has maybe been the best unit position group on this team the last couple of years. That's the offensive line. And as you mentioned, everybody gone, right? You lose 6 guys. They've won 2 Joe Moore Awards in the last 3 seasons. They've had a tremendous amount of success. A lot of that success is due to what Sherrone Moore had been as the offensive line coach, and then he eventually became the offensive coordinator of this team as well. So they've recruited pretty well at this position. They've brought in some transfers as well. What are your expectations of what this offensive line can be? I think they're not going to be, the Barnharts, the Zinters, and guys that have had that experience these last couple of years. But what do you think we can realistically expect from this offensive line in 2024?
Yeah, and Sherrone Moore said that a few weeks ago. Like, Zinter and Keegan weren't going to be here for 10 years. At some point, those guys were going to have to move on. And really, you would have trusted some of the guys behind them had Zinter and Keegan gone to the NFL after 2022, which was certainly on the table. They decided to run it back. Obviously, that decision pays off with them winning the national championship. But they have guys back there or up there, up front, who they would have trusted last year. Greg Crippen at center is somebody who's been waiting his turn behind, Olu Oluwatimi and Drake Nugent, 2 guys that were first team all Big Ten. But now I think he's ready. Giovanni El Hadi has started some games a couple years ago and did pretty well. He's going to start at right guard this year. So I really like the interior they have. They brought in Josh Preeb, 3rd team all Big Ten selection last year from Northwestern. So in conference transfer. I like the middle 3 on Michigan's offensive line. I think they'll be fine. Tackle's a little bit more of a question mark. Miles Hinton has starting experience at Stanford as well. Started at the beginning of last year at Michigan before losing his job. And then I think either Andrew Gentry or Jeff Percy at right tackle. That's kind of the biggest question mark, I would say, on probably the entire offense right now. But you said it. I mean, you kind of have to trust a Sherrone Moore offensive line at this point with what he's done there. Nick Saban said at the end of last year, or actually at the draft about last season, that Michigan had the best coached offensive line of anyone in the country that he saw. And that's high praise. So Sherrone Moore is no longer the offensive line coach. He is the head coach, but you got to believe that as the head coach, he's going to have good offensive line play. You have to trust that to a certain extent, but it's going to be huge because I think without a J.J. McCarthy at quarterback, as you said earlier, they're going to have to design the offense differently, and that means you're going to have a really good run game. So it's up to the guys up front, Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings, all those guys to make sure they can be productive in moving the football on the ground and protecting whoever this quarterback is too.
A lot of people have been saying in Big Ten circles with USC coming in, right? Well, whoever Lincoln Riley picks as the quarterback, I think they're going to be just fine. Sherrone Moore, maybe with offensive line, is also in that category as well, where, whoever he picks as his 5, he's going to coach them up, develop them, and they're just going to be just fine. Now, they also got a pass block. So let's get into this pass game a little bit and the weapons that are on the outside. I love what Colston Loveland provides. I think he's one of the best. I think he could be the best tight end in America. You've seen him line up in the slot, the traditional tight end spot. They move him around the formation. What, in your opinion, you've been able to see him up close and personal, what makes him one of the best tight ends in America?
Yeah, he's just such a good athlete. He's a fluid athlete. He's explosive when he catches the ball, turns and he needs 3 yards still for a first down. He's kind of got, not to compare him to Brock Bowers because I don't think he's that type of player yet or, at this point, but he's got that explosiveness where he can really get up to his top speed quickly for a guy that size. So he's a mismatch problem. I do think, though, that this year that teams are going to focus on him a little bit more. Defenses are going to. So Michigan's going to need other guys to step up. And I think Tyler Morris is probably the number 1 guy there at wide receiver to do that. Michigan also uses tight end, multiple tight ends quite a bit. 58% of their snaps last year had at least 2 tight ends on the field. So they need other guys to step up there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because you don't just lose Roman Wilson, but you lose Cornelius Johnson on the outside as well. You lose A.J. Barner as kind of that second tight end who actually played more snaps last year than Colston Loveland did. So they're going to need other guys to emerge here because if you don't have the quarterback, you don't have Blake Corum, 5-year offensive linemen are gone. Like all those other margin areas need to be sound. I think they have the guys to do it. We just haven't seen them do it. So until they do, it remains one of those things that you're waiting to watch and see what happens.
You mentioned Tyler Morris. You've also got Samaj Morgan Frederick Moore is expected to possibly step up. Like, you don't have a receiver that returns, a wide receiver, I should really specify, more than 205 yards and a couple of scores. Like, there's not a ton of returning production at the wide receiver. Outside, maybe those three, who do you expect to step up and maybe be a number one guy? And maybe outside of those three, who are some other guys that you could see play a bigger role in this pass game? Because it feels like somebody needs to step up into that Roman Wilson type of role this season.
Yeah, I think Tyler Morris is the next guy to do that. Now, will he be Roman Wilson? We don't know. Probably not in terms of some of the game-breaking plays that Roman Wilson made, the tough catches and that sort of thing. But I wouldn't put it past Tyler Morris either. I think he's going to be a good player. I have him as my breakout player on the Michigan offense. And then Samaj Morgan, it's not just some of the guys we haven't heard of before, or a lot of people haven't heard of. It's a guy like Samaj Morgan, who is a gadget player, who is a role player. 18 of his 22 catches last year came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. 14 of them were behind the line of scrimmage. They like to get the ball to him in space and let him do his thing, use his shiftiness to his advantage. But now he's probably going to have to make some catches down the field. He's probably going to have to be on the field for third downs more, that sort of thing. So it's guys that we know about that are going to have to expand their roles. But yeah, Frederick Moore, I think, is one that could do some things as well as kind of Michigan's third wide receiver. They bring back Amorian Walker, who spent one semester at Ole Miss after 2 years at Michigan. He's one of those boomerang transfers, who is back at wide receiver, played corner last year, is another one of those freak athletes, but he just hasn't done much in his career to this point, entering his junior year, so he still has time. But he's somebody that if he emerges, he could be a downfield threat. I just don't know that he's going to right away. So they need, a few guys to be steady for them. And then if you can get some of those, other guys that step in when they need to, like an Amorian Walker, then I think you should be just fine there. But at the same time, you look at it and you say, okay, well, if Alex Orji could be the quarterback, we don't need an elite set of receivers because he can do some other things with his legs. So if you build the offense around him, I think they're just fine at wide receiver. But yeah, I mean, again, I think Tyler Morris is probably the guy to circle here.
A big narrative around this Michigan team, and I kind of kicked this preview off with it, is just the sheer amount of personnel that they lost. But man, we are kicking things and going into the defense. This is what I came here for, because I love this unit. They are one of the best defenses in America. For how much the people are talking about how much they lost, there are a lot of pieces returning on this Michigan defense. You look at the Will Johnsons, the Makari Pages in the secondary. You look at that tandem up front of the defensive line. There's a lot to pick from. But what excites you most about this Wolverine defense headed into this season?
Yeah, I think a couple things is, one, just to watch Will Johnson and his evolution. He probably played last year at 85%. He came into the year kind of banged up. He got hurt again late in the season, and he still performed at All-America level. So this is a cornerback number one in the draft for next season, according to pretty much any expert you look at, and he's just so good. So I'm excited to watch him. But the D-line, I know we'll talk about that as well, but I think they're going to be really good, at least the starters there. Depth is probably a work in progress. And then Wink Martindale, 60-year-old coordinator who spent the last 20 years in the NFL, comes back to college football, is running the Ravens-style defense that Michigan has had the last 3 years. But, he's the guy that kind of created that defense to a certain extent with John Harbaugh and the Ravens, spent 10 years there, 4 as a coordinator. How will he implement his own style to this defense? He's probably known to be more aggressive than the other two, Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter, who have been the coordinators at Michigan the last 3 years. So how is that going to be different? Are they going to blitz their safeties more? I think that's on the table as well. Are they going to, play more man coverage after playing a lot of zone last year? So just how Wink Martindale engineers this defense is going to be really fun to watch too.
I'm excited about Wink. It's kind of a full circle moment. The OG of this defense kind of coming back to Michigan, where you've seen Mike McDonald, you've seen Jesse Minter. A lot of people, right? They've seen, hey, he's a little bit more aggressive. He assured the folks, okay, let's put those Don Brown comparisons to one side and say, hey, we're going to be a little bit different than that here as we approach things in this defense. Let's talk about this defensive line, because wow, are they great up front. The combination of Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on this defense, but you also got to look to the exterior, guys coming off the edge like the Derek Moores and the Josiah Stewarts of the world. Now, when I look at D-lines, when I look at the Big Ten as a whole, Michigan and Ohio State stand out to me. There's a lot of really good ones. Oregon's a good one. Penn State's a good one. Nebraska's a good one. Iowa is always good up front. But do you view this Michigan D-line as the best in the Big Ten and maybe one of the best in college football?
Yeah, I think the starting four is for sure. And again, I think depth is maybe something that there's certainly something they're going to look to boost. And I think, maybe an Ohio State has more options there because some of their guys came back. And, really technically Michigan lost all four starters up front from last year, but they returned one of the best D lines in the country, which tells you they were incredibly deep last year. And again, that they have a ton of talent heading into this year. But this was the four that I guess Mason Graham would have been a starter last year. So they lost three of the four starters, but this was the four that were on the field for the final stop, getting Jalen Milroe down on 4th down in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. They trusted this four enough to put him out there. And Josiah Stewart blows up All-American right tackle and first-round draft pick J.C. Latham. Derek Moore technically was the guy who made the stop. When you ask the guys after that play, nobody knew who even made it because it was such a, he just ran into a brick wall there with the way these guys pushed back the Alabama offensive line. But those guys did some work last year. They rotated a lot. These guys got to play a lot. But Kenneth Grant, is one of the more physically imposing players, although he's one of the nicest kids you'll meet in the country. And Mason Graham, we know what he can do. The edge rushers, Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart, I think they're going to be play at a really high level. Josiah Stewart, I think, has another gear he can reach. Even as a pass rusher, he's one of the rare players in the country that has over 20 sacks in his career. Had a couple big years at Coastal Carolina before transferring to Michigan last season. So there's a lot to like about those four. And Wink Martindale talked about this week. Early in the year, they're probably going to have to play a lot as they develop the depth. And as you mentioned, as they play a tough schedule early on with Texas and USC and Washington, all in those first 5 or 6 games. So I'm excited to watch this group. I think it's going to help a lot of what they do on the back end as well. It may determine how aggressive Wink Martindale has to be. You may not have to bring 5 or 6 if you can get pressure with these 4 or even 3 at times. And I think they're going to be able to do that. So that allows them to use this really big word that Wink Martindale talks about, which is flexibility with this defense. They're going to be playing some teams that can throw the football, move the ball early on in the year, Texas, USC, even Fresno State in the opener. Yeah. They're going to slink around a little bit. But Michigan's going to be flexible enough, due in part to 1, this system, and 2, this great defensive line to have the answers, I think, for a lot of those teams and keep themselves in the game.
So Rod Moore goes down in the secondary at the safety position, guy who made the play to seal the win against Ohio State. So you look at Makari Page, seems like the starter. It was going to be Rod Moore, as we talked about with injury, but who do you see filling in next to Makari Page at the safety position? Because you got Quentin Johnson back there, and then they went into the transfer portal in this spring period, and they hit it hard and brought in some really good talent. So who do you kind of see filling in the secondary?
Yeah, they left no stone unturned when it came to hey, we need a little bit of help here at safety. Let's go get a couple guys. And they did that. Jaden Mangum, who was an honorable mention All Big Ten player last year at Michigan State, makes the switch just down the road to the University of Michigan. And then Wesley Walker, who was another guy who transferred this offseason a couple times. He spent the spring at Louisville, but had a couple good years at Tennessee as well, who I think can play a big role too. I would say it's probably Quentin Johnson, but if these other guys come in fall camp, grasp the defense right away, then I wouldn't rule anything out because I think that they're both really good players. So they have depth there is the big thing. The one thing that they don't have is at least, somebody that's proven to be yet a total game changer, and that was Rod Moore. He didn't play last year in the beginning of the year either due to injury, but he was so good. He has been for a few years now. He makes those big plays when you need him to. He's a ball hawking safety as well. We saw, everybody knows about the big interception to seal the Ohio State win last year. So You're going to lose that on the back end, but I mean, I think they have enough good players back there, and you have a great corner in Will Johnson where you can kind of mask not having that game changer like Rod Moore.
Let's move to the linebacker position. This was maybe the position that took the biggest hit in terms of departures and NFL draft picks. But now when you talk about some of these backfill options, you look at Ernest Hausman, who transferred in at the beginning of last season, had a really good freshman year at Nebraska. Jayshon Barham was probably the best defender that Maryland had. And all of a sudden you plug these guys in, and this linebacker group looks pretty well. You know, a lot of people might view this as the weakness considering what departed, but what are kind of your thoughts on this linebacker room and how good that they can be? Because I look at Barham in this Michigan system, and I think he could possibly be a star and an all Big Ten type of player.
Yeah, I agree on Barham. And, you know, I think he's just a dynamic athlete, too, that if you're Wink Martindale, you're probably salivating thinking about the opportunities you could have using him as a blitzer, you know, dropping him in coverage when they need to as well, and just the ability he's going to have in, you know, when he needs to fit some runs and things like that. And then Ernest Hausman, the same thing. I mean, he played the 16th most snaps on Michigan's defense last year, but he was third on the team in tackles. He was kind of that third starter behind Junior Colston and Michael Barrett. So it's another case just like the defensive line where you technically lose a couple starters, but you're bringing back guys that have played a lot of football. And Jayshon Barham, Sherrone Moore said a few weeks ago that he was one of those guys when you played in Maryland that you were like, oh, shoot, we got to play this guy again because he's that good of an athlete. And sure enough, he intercepted J.J. McCarthy in the end zone at the end of the second quarter in College Park last year, which completely changed that game, which went down to the wire in the fourth quarter. So he is a potential game changer.
Let's take a look at this schedule right now, because in a 12-team college football playoff, you feel comfortable if you're Michigan at somewhere around 10-2 to get into that tournament to be able to compete for a national championship. But you got Oregon on the schedule early in November, of course, Ohio State at the very end of the year. How big is this Texas game? Because I almost feel, you know, you could certainly beat Oregon at home. You could certainly go to Columbus and win that game. But I feel like this is a big early contest. I don't want to say must win because I hate, you know, these early September games being must win. But how big, in your opinion, is this early season game against the Texas Longhorns?
Yeah, I think it's really big, you know, for so many different reasons. But one of them being that if you drop that, you start to look at the outlook where, okay, we're going to be at least challenged against USC. We have to go to Washington. Yep. I know they're in the Big Ten now, but they used to be in the Pac-12. Michigan hasn't won at a Pac-12, a road game against a Pac-12 team since 1989. They've lost 4 in a row. There's just something about going out west if you're a Big Ten team, and if you're one of the West Coast teams coming to the Midwest, there's something about it that makes it challenging. So, you know, that's going to be challenging. Then you look at Oregon in November. You have to go to Ohio State. You know, there are a lot of games on this really tough schedule that you look at as, you know, games that Michigan probably should win, at least 3 or 4 of those, or at least 3, but also games that you could drop. And they didn't have that last year. You know, that was a great team. Obviously, they won the national championship, but they weren't really challenged until mid-November. This year, it's going to be right away. And you said it, with a team that has a lot of new faces, a lot of new coaches, so they have to be up to speed right away. So I think it's really big. The interesting part of it, though, is that it's obviously a non-conference game, and now there's an automatic bid that goes to the conference champion. So you could lose that game. You could have 3 losses total, but 1 or 2 in Big Ten play, and either work yourself in as a 11, 10-11 seed in the at-large, or if you have 2 losses, win the Big Ten by winning a game against Oregon or at Ohio State or something like that, getting in as one of the 2 teams in Indianapolis, winning that and getting a top 4 seed. So there are so many possibilities now in college football. The good thing is, if you're Michigan, if you lose that game, you're not totally out of it now that it's a 12-team playoff. And if you're Texas, it's the same thing, obviously. But it's just going to be big to set the tone in the Sherrone Moore era for this season. And it's 2 national powers going at it, too. It's just an important game in that aspect. It's going to be fun to see. These 2 teams have only played once in history. This will be the second time. And that was in the 2005 Rose Bowl, which was a pretty epic game. So should be a good one on September 7th.
Which opponent outside of the Oregons, the Texases, the Ohio States, do you think is the biggest challenge for Michigan? You mentioned October 5th, they got to travel to Washington. I know Washington loses rematch of the national championship. I know Washington loses just about everything, but you mentioned that record against West Coast teams, and Washington at that point in the season has a favorable early season schedule, so they could be building some confidence. But in your opinion, which matchup really produces the biggest challenge outside of those big three on this 24 slate?
Yeah, I think it is Washington, and for the reasons we both listed. And I know they lose a ton, right? Like they had about 25 transfers out when Kalen DeBoer left. They also had tied a program record with 11 or 12 draft picks. I can't remember which. And then they have a ton of new guys come in. They're going to have a new quarterback in Will Rogers. They're going to have a new head coach in Jed Fish. He brought 12 of his players with him from Arizona. So you don't know what that's going to look like until we see it. But what is a luxury for them is the schedule you mentioned. And they're going to have a lot of juice coming in to that game. It's kind of their first big game. It's a home game. You're going to get the Sailgators out there before the game. It should be a fun environment, but I think that's going to be a tough one. And then as kind of a wild card trap game type, I think it's Minnesota is one that I would circle on September 28th. It's in between USC and Washington. Minnesota brings back a lot on their defense. They bring back a lot on the O-line and at running back. They were able to run the ball last year. A lot's going to come down to their new quarterback who's coming up from the FCS level. But at the very least, when you look at these teams that are kind of middle of the road or bottom of the Big Ten, if they can do one or two things pretty well, like Minnesota can, I think, in running the ball and having a decent defense, they're always kind of a threat, kind of like a Maryland on a year-in, year-out basis where they may go 7-5 every year, but since they can throw the ball a little bit, they can test in Ohio State like they did last year for a while. They can test Michigan like they did last season until the fourth quarter. So I look at Minnesota as a team on that schedule that can do a couple things pretty well, and will compete for a bowl game, so there'll be a challenge. But don't sleep on the opener against Fresno either. Not to sound like a coach, but they're a team that if Michigan's breaking in a lot of pieces, they're a team that's going to come in with confidence. They made a few straight bowl games. They're one of the best group of 5 teams in the country.
Clayton Sayfie of the Wolverine, thewolverine.com, the Wolverine podcast, the Michigan site at the On3 Network. Clayton, it's going to be a fun year to watch the Maize and Blue to see if they can at least get in position to pull the repeat. We appreciate you joining me for talking all things Michigan, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching Big Ten TED, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten TED to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.